All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to DevOps Pro Europe 2022. That's right, 3 days ahead of us, chocked full of brilliant knowledge that you're going to need. A wide array of different subjects ahead of us, but first of all, time to introduce. I'm Darren Elmy, your ever faithful host and companion through it all. And across these 3 days, we will see internationally recognized and highly skilled pros providing you with the type of insights that should allow you to go forward and improve your own DevOps methodologies. Now, you'll not only be able to receive this valuable information, you will also be able to talk back and forth with our experts across these 3 days via the Q&A sessions at the end of each session. So make sure you hang around for those. But before we get into the talks, I know he's eager, but he's got to wait a second. We need to thank the people that made this possible. Of course, first of all, big thanks to Accenture, our golden sponsor. They're a leading global professional services company providing a broad range of services and solutions in strategy, consulting, digital, tech, and operations. They basically got it all covered. And then, of course, big shout out to TechTree. They are a platform focused on building the first social economic network for devs and their teams with a focus on zero spam and supporting open source, something we can always get behind. And following through, we do come to our silver sponsor, is of course Rocket Software. With over 70% of the world's IT workload running legacy platforms, they help companies innovate using the technology and data they already have. And of course, there is someone else who we have to thank. You folks at home, because you watching, if it wasn't for you, we couldn't even put this together. We wouldn't have an audience. It would just be in an echo chamber. So really big shout out to you. And we want to reward your contribution, which is why we have partnered with Packet, who will reward the most active conference attendees with free ebooks of their choice. The way that you stand a chance of winning some of those is by rating sessions and leaving comments. Be as active as possible. We definitely encourage it here. And of course, rounding that out, Manning's virtual booth will give you a chance to win free books of your choice. So also check them out. But guys, you didn't come here for the show, right? We came here to hear the big boy knowledge, which is why, without further ado, let's get underway. I've got Nicholas Liffen here to talk to you about why developer-first process and tooling is critical in the shifting left paradigm.
Perfect. Well, I don't know. I don't reckon I could beat that introduction. That was I love the energy coming from you there. But anyway, on that note, I think we are ready to get started. So, firstly, welcome everyone. This is the second welcome. I'm sure you are going to get many throughout this whole conference. And welcome to the DevOps Pro Conference in Europe. As you can tell, I am super excited to be here today and giving you this opening keynote session. So before we dive into anything, I do want to open up with a few remarks. So obviously, when this conference was first organized, we were all going to be together in Lithuania. And I think there's a great stigmatism around face-to-face conferences where you get to build better relationships and you get to like have them side conversations that you may not think that you can get online. Now, I have actually been lucky enough to do a few face-to-face conferences. I've also done a few virtual conferences. And one of the remarks that I want to open up with, and possibly one of the challenges to everyone on this call, with virtual conferences, it really breaks down the barrier of communication and you being able to ask that question. So one thing that I challenge you all to do, especially during my session, but also all of the other sessions that you have throughout today, I really do challenge you all to ask that question, ask for clarification. If you don't understand something, make sure that you share your opinion. Virtual conferences make it so easy for you to communicate. And I'm a real big believer, the more that you put into these virtual conferences, the more that you will actually get out. That is what I have found before. So a challenge to you all, especially for my session, but keep that in the back of your mind throughout every session here. Now, I'm obviously delighted to be your opening keynote session. I am really hoping that you're looking forward to getting a lot out of this session. But just to take a quick plug at all of the other speakers and all of the other sessions that are going on, I took a look through the schedule about a week ago now and was incredibly impressed with a lot of the sessions that are going on. So if you haven't, I really recommend that you go and take a look through the schedule and go ahead and pick out your sessions. There are some great ones that I know you are all going to go ahead and love. So without further ado, I think it's good to get started. Now, versus me doing this keynote session, like I think of traditional keynote session. So normally I've done a few keynotes before and they last the whole sort of 50 minutes, 55 minutes. And there's 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. And some of the feedback that I've always got through doing these sessions are, it's so much better to have a bit of a Q&A and to actually keep things informal and keep things collaborative. So that is what I'm actually going to try and do with you all today. So I'm going to only try and keep this presentation to about, I would say 40 minutes, like hopefully 35, 40 minutes. And I really want to spend the majority of the time at the end having a Q&A with you all about what I am talking about today. So I absolutely encourage throughout this session and throughout my talk, if I mention something that you have a strong opinion about or you want clarification, I really recommend that you bring it up in the chat and actually have a conversation about it. When I've done this talk before, it has provoked a few different opinions, it's provoked a few different thoughts, and I think there's really healthy conversation that goes on. I think it shares a different perspective than what people are used to. So just before we do get started, I will finish that with, please collaborate and communicate in the chat. I will save plenty of time at the end to have a bit of a Q&A with you all, because I think that is where we all get the best out of this session. But again, I am absolutely delighted to talk to you today about why developer first process and tooling is almost now fundamental and critical in the shift left and cloud paradigm, even though it may not be what you think it is today. So let's get started. And firstly, let's get to know me a little bit more. So I actually see that everyone has been posting their locations in the chat, which I think is a great thing to do. Being virtual is easy to do. If you haven't put your location in the chat, please do. I am from Reading in the UK. I haven't seen anyone else actually joining from the UK yet. I see lots from Lithuania. I see Poland, Sweden. If there are any from the UK, it may just be me. But please do put your location in the chat. Really keen to see that diverse set of people we have joining. And I think that shows the credit of this conference. We always get such a diverse sort of like group of people joining. And that actually goes ahead and means that we get very diverse thoughts and very diverse opinions. So again, love that we see people joining. I see Netherlands, Romania. Again, great that you're all putting your sort of locations in there too, and keep that going throughout the conference. If you do join, it is really good to see where everyone is from. Now, my name is Nick Liffen, as what has been introduced. Now, I currently work for a company called GitHub that you all may be used to working with. Again, source code management tool, turning into this DevOps ecosystem. And my role there is specifically, I play the role of an architect on the advanced security team for anyone that is used to working with GitHub. Now, I really want to share my passions with you. So I have a huge passion for developer experience and DevSecOps. This really came from when I used to work for a company called Lily, and I was spearheading a lot of the DevOps and developer experience work there. So I have a huge passion for automation, and I also have a passion for making the lives of developers as easy as possible. As I'm sure we have many developers, many DevOps people in the audience today can relate to, there can be a lot of friction in the developer workflow. So I have a huge passion for unblocking that friction, and that is where a lot of my talk will be focused on today. But again, you're welcome to go to my blog, nickliffen.dev, and you can see a few of the other opinions that I share specifically around developer experience and DevSecOps. Now, outside of work, I have a huge passion for golf. So if any of you are into golf, I'm always open for a conversation. And unfortunately or fortunately, I use far too many emojis throughout my presentation. So you will be equipped to that today. So that's a quick introduction into myself. Hopefully that gets to know me, your presenter, a little bit today. So let's talk about what we're actually going to discuss today. So if you read the title of my talk, you can almost perceive it in a few different ways. But the way that I want to tell my sort of presentation, tell my story today, is to actually go through a timeline and to actually put you in the shoes of a real developer. So I'm really going to start by giving a high-level overview around how developers used to work. So this is going to be very high level, and to a few people that have been developers for years now, you're going to think, I already know this. Bear with me. I'm then going to move on to how we traditionally work today, or how a lot of us want to work today, and like how a software developer has sort of like, what are the main touch points, main interactions a developer goes through. I'm then really going to start to get into the meat of this presentation that talks about how process and tooling really influences the way that developers work, and how this whole shift left culture that the whole industry has been promoting throughout the last probably 6 or 7 years now, right? How that has some possible side effects that people maybe didn't first think of when this whole shift left paradigm really kicked into gear. I'm then going to use security as an example, because probably most recently, security has shifted left. The most recent, obviously, testing was a while back. Security is sort of the whole buzzword now. So I will use security as an example. I'm then going to move on to some concluding thoughts of my own, and then we're going to dive straight into a Q&A session with you all, where we get to go through your thoughts on what I talk about today. So let me open up with a question for you all, and I want you all to think about this, and you're all going to have your preconceptions. You're more than welcome to share your thoughts in the chat. But a question for you all to think about: is the shift left term the correct phrase the industry should be advocating? Now, don't overthink it, don't overcomplicate it. Just what is the first thought that comes to your mind when you think about shift left? Do you think this is the correct phrase that we, as DevOps engineers, developers, people in charge of developer tooling, should be advocating for? And I'm then going to re-ask this question at the end, but please take the next sort of like 10 seconds to think about what is your answer to this question. Now, I promised you I'd go through a little bit around how developers worked first of all. And the way that I'm going to do that is I want to introduce you to my developer dummy called Finn. So Finn is going to be the person that I use throughout my presentation. So he is going to per se be the use case that I use. Now, Finn is a developer. The year is 2005, so we are going back a fair bit of time. And Finn has been given a use case. So Finn has been tasked, hey Finn, can you go ahead and deploy a web application? So that is what Finn has been asked to do. Now, way back in 2005, this is how Finn used to work, and this is at a macro level. So Finn would have a project manager, and this project manager would likely be like a BA or someone that would be in charge of building requirements and building out a subset of tasks that Finn would need to do to actually go ahead and complete this use case, which is to deploy a web app. So Finn would have a project manager that would go ahead, and this person would be dedicated to going ahead and building out them requirements, what we all know of today as user stories. Now, once that has all been built out, that would then be passed over to Finn, and Finn would then go ahead and be like, okay, cool, let's get started. Now, Finn would go ahead and do all of the development work. Back then, Finn would also likely do all the design work. So Finn would go ahead and do the design, do the development. He would likely spend a long time just going ahead and doing both of these things. And when Finn is finished, and when Finn goes, yeah, I'm really happy with this looks good, Finn would go ahead and then per se say, hey, I'm done. Testers, can you go ahead and test this application? And at this point, Finn would most likely sit back. Maybe he would move on to another project. Maybe he would do something else. But Finn's work for the time being of this specific web app is done, because the testers would now go ahead and manually test the application. And again, this is 2005, so there is no real automated tests going on. The testers may be doing some bash scripting, but most likely they are manually going ahead and testing this application. Now, at the same time or after that, Finn would also hand off to some security people. And the security people would be like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and see if there are any possible security problems with this application. Again, Finn's sitting back, maybe working on something else, whilst the security people are doing their thing. And again, yeah, we're in 2005, right? So there's no per se cloud. Finn would most likely hand over to some infrastructure people, and these people would need to rack and stack some hard metal servers. So again, Finn would then hand over his maybe like what RAM, like what sort of cores he needs, and the infrastructure people would go and sort of like rack and stack the servers. But Finn isn't really doing any of this work, right? He had some testers, some security people, some infrastructure people to go ahead and do this work for him. Now, obviously, you may iterate on this. So the testers may then come back to Finn 3 weeks later and say, Finn, we found 2 or 3 problems. Can you go ahead and fix it? Finn would then go ahead and fix the work, hand back off to the testers. Testers would give a thumbs up. The security people may be like, hey, I found a cross-site scripting problem. Can you go ahead and fix it? Finn would then fix it. Security would give a thumbs up. And then the infrastructure people would be like, yeah, your servers are good to go. And they'll be good. Well, in about a week or so, we are relying on actually receiving some hardware. So Finn would wait a week. Once they're in, infrastructure people would give the tick. And again, you would have an application built. Now, that is obviously really high level, but you can see this is how developers really used to work. Finn used to be in the middle, and he would really just be doing that software development work. Now, as I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, man, like this didn't work, and like this hasn't been the case for years now, has it? Now, again, like you all probably have your opinions on like what was wrong there. And I'm just going to share a few of the things that the industry realized this really wasn't working. And the most obvious one was it was so slow to release the software. And again, like you would have so many bottlenecks in that process because you're waiting on people to finish their work, and Finn would just per se not be doing much or working on a different project. So again, it was very slow to release this software. It was also meant it was incredibly expensive to release this software, right? Like because it took so long, that natural cost was going to be higher and higher. And naturally, that also led to being incredibly inefficient. You had so many of these per se like problems, and you had so many ways where it could go wrong that it was incredibly efficient. And there was so much more that per se could effectively not go well. And the traditional term that we'll most likely hear is throw it over the wall, right? So going back to that use case, you would have your project manager. They would go ahead and do their work and then throw it over the wall to Finn. And Finn would go ahead and then do the design and do the development work. And again, once Finn's completed, they would go ahead and they would throw it over the wall to the testers, and the testers would do their work. And again, then over to security, then over to infrastructure. And then you have to repeat that cycle all over again. And the whole industry was like, man, like this isn't good. Like we can't continue to work like this. And obviously what you're all thinking is this is a very waterfall way of working. And this is a very legacy way that not many people do anymore. But way back when, this was a serious problem. And like this was generally how a lot of developers worked. But then this whole shift left paradigm came along, right? And again, like we had to tackle some of them problems that were mentioned. And you saw this whole hype around DevOps, maybe DevSecOps nowadays. And you heard all the things, okay, we need to start to shift all these things left. And you can see by a few of the charts and a few of these graphs here, it was going to be cheaper, it was going to be more efficient, and it was going to be better. So they shift a lot of this work left into the developers' hands so they can do. And I think everyone has their own interpretations of shift left. And I think like there is generally no right or wrong way of understanding what shift left means. For the people that maybe don't know or don't understand, shift left and the fundamentals behind shift left always per se stay the same. They are really there about finding bugs, finding issues, and finding problems earlier in your software development lifecycle. So when you get to your release time, you don't need to go ahead and spend the next sort of like hour, day, week fixing all of these problems that you could have fixed when you were writing that code. So it is really just about finding things earlier in the life cycle, so it's cheaper and more efficient for you to actually go ahead and release that software. So this whole shift left paradigm came about. But what actually happened when we started to shift left. And let's break this down to some of the specifics that I just spoke about in the few prior slides. So previously you had your testers that would go ahead and do a lot of the manual testing. But wait, we're now shifting left, right? So we're shifting left. So we're shifting a lot of these responsibilities to the developer. And over testing, finding bugs, that's one of the key principles and key behaviors of shifting left. So it makes sense to shift a lot of this testing left to the developer. So testers would come along and say, hey, like you wrote this function, you wrote this application. It's likely going to be a lot more efficient if you go ahead and write some of these unit tests, some of these regression tests yourself. You know the code better than I do. Like it takes me a little bit of time to get up to speed with this code. And also you're a developer, right? Like I think I would struggle to like write this code. So developers, we need you to write these unit tests and regression tests. And Finn, in this case, would be like, yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. Like when I raise a pull request, when I raise a change set, I'm more than happy to per se write some unit tests and if needed, some regression tests to make sure that this is covered. Yeah, not a problem. I can absolutely do that. Now, obviously, we live in the world of infrastructure as code nowadays, right? So a lot of the infrastructure people, as we're shifting left, would be like, hey, like you're building a web app, right? And we're infrastructure as code, like you're the developer, you write a lot of the code. It's going to be a lot quicker if you write the per se infrastructure that comes alongside this application, right? Like I need, like if you're deploying to AWS, let's say, it's a web app, maybe use Lambda, use S3 with a CDN. And yeah, but like as you're writing the code and you're writing the web app at the same time, can you go ahead and also write the infrastructure as code? And Finn would be like, yeah, like that again, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? Like we're trying to shift left, like we're trying to not go ahead and create like these bottlenecks where we're waiting on infrastructure to write the code afterwards. So as I'm writing the code, sure, as a developer, I'm more than happy to write this infrastructure as code at the same time. Not a problem. You then have these project managers that came along and were like, Finn, really need your help. Like, you know a lot of this technical work yourself, and we're now working out of Agile. So what I need you to do is, can you help draft a lot of the user stories that come alongside this work? We really need your help just making sure that they're correct. Like, I can help, but as you are the developer, are you able to help draft a lot of these user stories? And also on top of that, I need you to keep this product board updated and attend a lot of the retros and the daily stand-ups. So if you're good with that, are you all right to help out and contribute to writing the user stories? And Finn would be like, yeah, like, I think that makes sense, right? Like we're shifting a lot of this left. And like, I think like, I know a lot of the technical work. So sure, like I'm more than happy to do that. But like, wow, like I'm doing testing, infrastructure. I'm now having to be a lot more involved in the project management work. Okay, yeah, like I think that's absolutely fine. And then security people would come along and be like, Finn, like we shifted security into Jenkins, into GitHub Actions or whatever CI you're using. Why don't you go ahead and fix all of these vulnerabilities? I'm looking at this PDF and there's 320 like vulnerabilities that need to be fixed. And Finn would be like, oh my goodness me, like there's so many vulnerabilities here. Like I don't have the time. Like I'm now going ahead. I'm still writing the software, but I also need to make sure that all my testing's done, all my infrastructure is done. I also need to make sure that all my project management stuff is kept updated. And again, like just as I was about to merge this pull request, I found like these 300 problems. Like I really don't have the time. I do have a deadline to get this out. And what would normally happen is a security person would be like, okay, like skim through and like fix the main vulnerabilities that stand out to you. So Finn would then have to go through and fix all of these vulnerabilities. So what happened when we started to shift left? Well, like a lot of the responsibilities, and they started to shift onto the developer. And on a high level, this is how a developer will work today. Again, you now have your developer that works hand in hand with your project manager, known probably as your Scrum Master nowadays, to coordinate a lot of the sort of like requirements and making sure that everything is per se ready for leadership to view and track and make sure that you're doing your work in the right way. Finn would then obviously have to go ahead and write that software. Nothing really changes there. But Finn is now writing a lot of the automated tests and now writing a lot of the regression tests, maybe some UI tests. And maybe they're doing it hand in hand with the tester. And the tester is maybe like validating what Finn has done is correct. If it's a large project, maybe there is some manual testing going on. But nowadays, a lot of these unit tests and regression tests are carried out by Finn. Same with security. We've shifted security left. So Finn is now also driving a lot of the security work and making sure that before that work is delivered, Finn has made sure there's no real security problems. But also, because this is just a single web app and there's not enough infrastructure people to do all of that IAC, Finn is now also doing a lot of the infrastructure work alongside that. So nowadays, for Finn to deploy a web application in 2022, Finn has evolved a lot more. And like when we think about it, the role of a developer has actually grown. Their responsibilities have grown alongside their workload. Like we're expecting more of developers today than really we ever have before. Again, like the role of the developer has really changed from really just writing application code to we're now like asking and we're now expecting them to do a lot more. And the above doesn't even mention a lot of these companies now require developers to make sure that they're updating READMEs. They're going ahead and updating design documents. Like, again, like especially in the more regulated companies, we're asking for developers to review these contents because developers know the code the best. So the role of a developer has really grown. And what that looks like, it looks a lot like this. And I see a lot of companies working at GitHub. I have the pleasure and absolute luxury to see so many different DevOps models and so many different DevOps tool chains. And I see so many companies that come to me with this diagram and say, Nick, I've smashed it. I have shifted everything left. Everything is fully automated. And when you look at this, look at all of the touch points a developer has to interact with. Focusing on the planning, you expect your developer to work in Jira or HP ALM or like wherever you actually plan in that work. They then need to go ahead and build their application, whether you're using Docker and like NPM, that's another tool. Then you have probably the one which is the huge monolith, which is CI, which maybe you're using Jenkins and you're integrating multiple tools in. So developers now have to go between their integration tools. And maybe you're using Ansible, like you're using Puppet, Chef, so on and so on to actually deploy your application. And then, of course, your devs are per se like helping monitor. So maybe you're using Datadog or Sentry. And that's only one tool in really each section. And the reality is there are so many more. So a developer nowadays has really previously gone from working on their local machine in their IDE and their per se IDE and the terminal. They're now interacting with so many different tools and so many more touch points, right? Developers live in Slack and all of these tools. So you have these DevOps models. You have a growing touch point way of working. And then just when you don't think you can automate enough, you have you have someone that says, everyone, fantastic news. The final part of our automation journey is complete. We've shifted another tool left. Developers, if possible, we're actually removing the manual UI testing that we was doing. Maybe we've introduced Cypress or another UI tool, which is a fantastic tool, by the way. But you're now saying, developers, we now need you to go ahead and do a lot of your UI testing. And again, like on behalf of most developers out there, like this is generally how it actually feels. And again, like it has gone from such a simple way of working to like, I am now going between 5 or 6 or 7 different tools out there. And like generally, like most days, like going and context switching is so high. Like I only spend a small amount of time per se actually doing development work. I'm going between 5 or 6 different tools to get the work that I need to complete. And it means that I'm not as productive as what I want to be. So let's sort of take a step back now and let's really think about like what we have just seen and what we have just witnessed. So it is really easy to consider that upfront value of shifting left and really solving the problems that we mentioned in the earlier slides, right? Because on the high level and on the top level, shifting left makes a lot of sense. Like it will per se make things cheaper. it will make things more efficient. But when we think about the actual reality of shifting left, like these downstream end user experiences are often overlooked and overshadowed. And the experiences that we are creating and fostering for our developers are maybe not what we actually expected or wanted to give them. So what are some of the problems of that previous slide and sort of like what I walk through? Again, what I mentioned earlier, it's incredibly high context switching. Again, like developers are now going between 5 or 6 different tools a day to get the data that they need. And you hear a lot of people be like, well, I integrated everything into CI, right? Like I've got all my data as a comment in that pull request. So developers actually don't need to leave GitHub. And if they need to see anything, they can go to Jenkins or whatever CI tool you use. And the reality is when everything passes, that is great. That is brilliant. But when something fails, your UI testing fails, your regression test fails, maybe you have a security problem that's very complicated, that pull request isn't going to give you the context and information that you need. So I now need to go between tool A, then tool B, and then tool C to find the information that I need to fix this. So I am now spending 3 or 4 hours a day making sure that like the code that I'm writing passes and making sure that any problems are actually solved. So you have this high context switching problem. And there was a fantastic blog post done, I think it was by Google, like a while back now, on some of the problems of context switching and high context switching. Like developers are like 4 times less productive if they leave their IDE and their source code management tool, and you per se get them to go between 4 or 5 different tools. If I find the link, I would love to share it because high context switching for developers nowadays is such a problem. And secondly, that also means lack of focused productivity. But wait, like wasn't one of the problems that shifting left was meant to solve was this productivity problem? Like we were meant to make things more productive, but maybe what we've actually done is have we per se increased productivity? Have we made productivity better, but not as better as what we thought it was going to be? And again, the reality is developers aren't as productive as what they per se like once were. And what that leads to is we aren't delivering the business value as quickly as you expected. And that was another sort of underlying behavior that we wanted to solve with shifting left, right? We wanted to make sure that we could deliver business value quicker and make sure that we could per se get that product out the door before anyone else. And another problem is like this lack of empowerment for developers. And this is often something that gets overlooked and overshadowed is you have a lot of people in their roles and in their jobs that have done things for a while. And again, like that it is the way that they are used to work. And obviously with shifting left, they are helping per se shift this paradigm and shifting tools in front of developers. But are we asking developers what they think? Are we asking developers what they want? Are we making sure that developers' voices are actually heard in this conversation? Because a lot of what I see nowadays is the developer's voice comes second, even though we're impacting that developer experience the most. So these are some of the key problems that we actually see. And these are some of the unapparent and unknown consequences of this whole shifting left paradigm that have generally had the most significant impact over the last 4 or 5 years. And it's something that has gone completely under the radar and really hasn't been thought of until the last sort of 18 months when the whole word developer experience and developer first sort of like tooling and process started to become popular. Now, I want to get specific for an example, because what I talked about up until now is very high level, right? Like it is very much at that macro level view. But I think this will really hit it home, and I will use security as an example. So 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, all of these security tooling were built for the security persona. And it was for a good reason, right? Because security was just a security thing. These security tools would per se be run. The security person would take a look at the results. They would then per se say, they would triage and they'd be like, yeah, maybe you need to fix X, Y, Z. And you had this dedicated security person that was really helping doing that. So these security tools really built their tooling and their experience around the security persona. And for an absolute good reason. Like I think it makes complete sense. But again, over the last 5 years, we've shifted left, and now we've shifted the security tools in front of the developers. And what we've gone ahead and done is said, okay, developers, we had these security toolings. We are super happy with these security tools. The results are fantastic. There's so much detail. You get lots of them. Developers, are you good to carry on using these? And what you generally see is some of these problems. You were hearing these, and these are general phrases that we actually hear. Developers are like, oh my goodness me, why is this tool so hard to use? Like, I see all this information about the vulnerability, but I don't know how to, it doesn't tell me any information on how to fix it. I have my deadline tomorrow. Like, this is great. I'm now looking on Stack Overflow. I'm even looking through Reddit to try and find how to actually fix this vulnerability, because it doesn't tell me how to fix it. Like, this is the first one I've seen of this. I have no idea. So, do you know what? I'm just going to leave this alone because I have no idea how to fix it. And you'd also hear these problems of, how big is this PDF? How many pages? How many alerts? And again, like, these security tools were really aimed at the security persona, and they would per se be able to triage, and they would have the time to go ahead and make sure that any false positives were ruled out, and the developer was per se only working on what makes sense. But nowadays, the developer sees a lot of the results before the security people ever do. So the developer, just as they're thinking, I'm good to merge this PR, my code is great, they're like, oh my goodness me, look at all of these problems. And then these are some of the real complaints that we hear. And then finally, this is a very, very common one. A lot of people try and provide a snapshot and summary in a pull request, or they go into the CI for a summary. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that is fantastic and that is great when it all works well. But one of the real problems that we generally see is when it doesn't work and the developer needs to actually see the detail, that's not in the pull request. So they then have to leave GitHub, leave their IDE. They then need to go into whatever tool they're using for security to find the results. And again, like it's really hard for them to use. And this really hasn't worked in the security world. And just to back that up, here is some of the data that shows vulnerabilities are only actually increasing as we have shifted left. So obviously over the last 5 years, we have gone through this whole paradigm of shifting security left. And we've gone ahead and said, developers, you're now using all of these tools. But have we actually, are we in a more secure space than when we started? Again, this is some of the data that was actually created by the GitHub data science team. And as you can see, the purple line shows the lines of code within open source software. And then the green line shows the vulnerabilities that are being introduced. And as you can see, there are a very consistent correlation. So what we would have expected, I would have expected this 5-6 years ago when security was such a second-class citizen to the software development model. But again, we've shifted these tools left, right? Developers, why aren't you going in and why aren't you per se fixing these vulnerabilities? And same with secrets, like we're seeing more and more GitHub secrets leaked than ever before. And it's baffling because surely this whole shift in left and making sure developers were using these tools, surely that was going to go ahead and actually fix the problems that we're seeing here. And the reality is it hasn't. But why? And this is one of the fundamental reasons why we see this as such a problem. These tools are not meant for these people. And let's get real about this for a second. And it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about because, again, we've seen these tools 5 or 6 years ago. It can go the same for testing. It can go the same for security. It can go the same for any sort of principle in the development model that you've shifted left. Companies and organizations were using these tools because they were meant for them people. But as we've shifted left, we've actually ignored the actual person that we're now giving data to. And let's use a metaphor for a second. And I will be very open with you all here. So last March, I had to go for surgery. And again, when I went for surgery, I wanted everything in that room the surgeon was using, from the tools they were using, the apparatus, the nurses in the room, the bed, everything in that room to be meant for the surgeon, because they were the one in charge. They were the one actually doing the work. And like the reason being is very obvious, right? Like you would have a better chance of a success rate. You would have a better chance of actually things being done quicker. Like overall the surgery would be a better experience. But if the surgeon was using tools that was meant for a farmer or meant for someone else, what are you likely going to get? You're likely going to get as like a slow surgery because the surgeon isn't used to using these tools, doesn't fit their environment. You're absolutely going to get a lousy success rate. So if I all put you in my shoes, and if you went for surgery tomorrow, would you be happy if the surgeon was using tools that was not meant for that surgeon? I guarantee you wouldn't, because again, you would get these lousy success rates. So why are we okay with giving developers tools that nowadays aren't actually meant for developers? And we're per se missing the bigger picture of, yes, shifting left is saving us money, but we're not even thinking about the end people that we're giving these tools for, and we're actually impacting their experiences. So in this sort of surgery case, the application is the patient and the developer is the surgeon. Like, we want to make sure that we give that developer the best possible experience, the best tools, the best process to make sure that that application is built the most effectively. So that is sort of the main reason why we are seeing this huge problem, is these tools aren't meant for these people, and developers are really feeling it. So I have, I think, maybe two slides to go now, and I wanted to sort of reflect some of the key outcomes that at least I wanted to share. Now, maybe you've taken away something different from this presentation, and that is absolutely okay. I think everyone from this presentation that I've done it to has taken away something slightly different, but these are the sort of key outcomes and key takeaways that I want you to go away from this presentation thinking. The first one is, at least understand there are consequences to shifting left, and it isn't this purple patch where nothing can go wrong and like life is going to be great after we shift left. And a lot of these you don't actually initially understand or recognize, but when you actually update your tooling, think more about the experiences you want to foster for these developers, and let that be one of the key decision criteria for picking tooling. And the same can be done for process. Whenever you update process or whenever you update tooling, that is going to impact the developers or really impact anyone that is different than the current people that are using the tools. Think more about the experiences that these people are going to want to use these tools or these processes with. And I guarantee you will get better outcomes thinking about that than just thinking about hey, we need to shift this tool left. Secondly, I think regarding the actual tooling, whatever company you will plan to work with, whether it's GitHub or any company out there, this is absolutely not just tied to GitHub. There are loads of tools out there that are developer first, but if they mention to you, hey, we will help you automate, we will help you remove this manual process, we will help you shift left. And if they want to introduce a new tool to you, always ask the question, so what do you do to focus on the developer experience? Obviously we are changing things here, and I really want to make sure that we're creating a great experience for our developers. They are the ones that are going to be using these tools. And would you consider yourself to be a developer first tools? What are your key principles and what are your key sort of fundamentals? That is such a key question that everyone should be asking nowadays. Whenever we impact developer tooling or whenever we change anything, we shouldn't be saying, yes, you're going to help me shift left, this is the way I used to do things, fantastic. Always think about that new experiences that we're going ahead and creating. Now, this is my final slide. I really wanted to take you through a little bit of a journey around how developers used to work to how they're probably on a high level working today. And I wanted to share a different perspective and different opinion around what people are most used to when we think about shifting left. And there are some great talks scheduled in this conference as well that focus on developer first tooling. So I think look at this schedule and look at the talks and anything that you hear about tooling, it is really going to positively impact that developer. So hopefully I've taken you through a little bit of a different perspective and different opinion to what you may have been used to. And hopefully you at least take away that nugget. So whenever you go back to your company, whenever you go back to your work and you hear about these sort of process changes and these tool changes and these sort of shift left paradigms, you're thinking about, wait, I need to make sure that we are actually going to positively impact the developer. So to conclude, at the start of this presentation, I asked you all a question. Is the shift left term the correct phrase the industry should be advocating for? Now, I asked you to think about it back then, and I want you to rethink about it now. And your answer may not have changed, and that is absolutely perfectly fine. Your answer may have changed slightly, it may have changed drastically, but I wanted to at least share with you my answer to that question. So my answer is, I do believe the principles behind shift left remain absolutely solid. Like, what we have been trying to do as an industry from a fundamental perspective is the right thing to be doing. We have to be making things more efficient. We have to be making things cheaper. Like, it is all about building things quicker and quicker. So I absolutely agree that shift left and the fundamentals behind that is correct. But frankly, in my opinion, it's not enough. We should be using phrases like developer experience and developer first, like as much, if not more, than what we hear with shift left, because they are becoming so much more essential phrases than anything that we've really perceived before. So again, I want you all to take away one of your thoughts, and throughout the rest of this conference, keep that on the back of your mind. So again, my question to you all is, what is your answer to this question? And that is everything that I wanted to walk through with you today. I really wanted to thank you all for joining me in this opening keynote session. It's been great to share these different perspectives with you. Now, I think we now are going to have, I think we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. I did take a little bit longer than what I wanted. I'm very passionate about this topic, but if there are any questions in the chat that people wanted answering, if anyone has a different opinion or a different perspective, I really want to hang around for the next 10 or so minutes and chat a little bit around developer experience and developer first, and if anyone does have any per se opinions on this topic. So I will watch out for the chat. Darren, maybe you've seen something, but I'm more than happy to per se be around and have a quick conversation around what we went through today.
Yeah, great talk, Nick. Honestly, a lot of interesting things to think about there. I did notice a few. First one that comes to mind is from Karthik. He asks, when and where should shift left be used in DevOps?
Yeah, fantastic question. And ironically, in that chat, I was stuck at that top bit. So I was like, is no one talking? I've just scrolled down and per se seen a lot of that talk. So firstly, thank you for everyone for sort of communicating. And I think that someone has sort of like given that an answer. And like, I actually completely agree with that. Like, I think it is in all aspects. Like, I think shift left should be a foundation in everything when it comes to DevOps. Like, one of the principles of DevOps is making sure that our developers and our operations are per se closer together. And naturally and fundamentally, that actually encourages a shift left philosophy, like as it is. So I think like they really do go hand in hand. When we think about DevOps tooling, like there is that shift left principle that stays the same. I think the main thing to think of, especially when it comes to DevOps, is the process and tooling that you're using in your DevOps tool chain developer first? And like, are the experiences that you're asking your developer to go through, are they focused on a developer? So I think like they still go hand in hand. We don't want to per se replace the two. They should absolutely be seen to work together. But I think I see someone else given that like an answer that I completely agree with.
Yeah, and an interesting one coming out from Christianus. What about many developers not being competent, knowledgeable, or motivated enough to wear many hats or roles, especially in regards to security? As much as we like to think about 10x devs, we shouldn't forget about the unseen 99% evil.
I love, and that is a point that has actually come up so many more. Like, I think for all my talks that I've given, that is something that has come up so much, and I think it is such a fair point. And that's why, like, one of the things that I try and focus on from a foundation perspective is like educating and empowerment. And going back to, I think one of the points that I mentioned about developer voices, like nowadays the expectations of a developer has grown, right? And not all developers do feel comfortable like doing security. And let's say that a cross-site scripting vulnerability has been introduced. But that's where developer first tools should aid developers in that sense. And a great example, let's talk about security. A traditional security tool would tell you loads about the vulnerability. And it would be like, here is per se, like everything this vulnerability is, but it wouldn't tell you too much on how to fix it. Now, a developer first tool should be saying to a developer, this is what it is, but most importantly, here is how to fix it. And here are some code snippets that I detected. Like I detected your code as JavaScript. So here are some JavaScript code snippets. Same for testing. A lot of these testing tools nowadays that are focused on developers, they say, hey, your test has failed here. And they give you information that aids the developer in fixing it. So I think like your question actually goes really hand in hand with ensuring that you do per se create that developer first experience. It should never substitute education and never substitute empowerment though. I think like you should absolutely make sure that your developer voices are heard. If they're struggling with something, and obviously more and more junior junior developers are coming on on board, and that's where like making sure that you have the right process, that if they do have questions, if they do have help, they are out there. But the industry has sort of fortunately or unfortunately shifted to this model of working where the expectations are higher of developers. They are doing more and more work, but it's really making sure that they are empowered to do their best possible work. And that is done via a combination of education, empowerment, and also developer first tooling. So I would say that is my answer to that question. But I think you can have many different per se procedures. But I absolutely agree with that 99 problem.
That's an interesting point. So kind of like that feeling that there's maybe a few supermen that are kind of making it look so easy to do, and there's then that pressure or expectation everyone else can just do it. And
it
I
is
guess maybe,
reality.
yeah, I think it leads into the whole process of like, this is quite new. This is really recent, right? So there's not like a standardized method yet. So it's still something that a lot of people are learning, right?
It is, yeah. And like software, and everyone in their seat working from home will laugh at this. Software's eating the world, right? Like that is a phrase that we have heard. And what that means is more and more developers are needed. And that is why like you see a lot of companies right now not seeing the problem, but like in 5 or 6 years' time, you're going to be working in a very reactive way. So like one of the main things that we're seeing a lot of companies do is they're starting to focus on being proactive. The companies that see the vision in 5 or 6 years' time are starting to become a bit more proactive, and they're starting to be like, okay, like I am realizing the future is software. Like, and I know we've been saying that for years now, but like we will get to a point where we can't sustain in this current model. So like, yes, there's no type 1 value, but like if we think about future and vision, being more developer first is really going to help us be a lot more proactive versus us having to be reactive in the future.
Yeah, I think it comes from people with that experience in those roles moving up the ladder, right? Being in a position to empower those
Yes.
new methods.
Yeah, and that's why I challenge everyone. I see a fair few hundred people on this call. Like, I challenge you all to go back to your organizations and just raise the point and keep that voice heard, because it really will, like, it will make your lives and your fellow developers' lives so much easier.
And it looks like we've got one from Sazwati. When integrated well with the DevOps pipelines, only the reports are the action items for the developers. The developer is not expected to understand the tool in that case, just the simple report in a readable format. So why or how does it even impact the developer's productivity?
Yeah, great. And I think that's something which every company does it different, right? But I think, like I mentioned this earlier, like, yes, I agree. You do shift a lot of this into your pipelines. Like, you shift testing, security, the results into your pipelines. But like, the reality is, again, when that all goes well and that's all thumbs up and it all passes, that summary is great. But again, I've been a dev myself. Let's say that I go ahead and I get 2 security problems introduced and my UI testing works. I can't fix that in that summary information. Like, there's not enough information given. That, like, you would have to provide so much. You'd have to do is copy the results and put them into Jenkins and make it also very, very, very formattable. So what I have to do is go to tool X and tool Y, and then I have to spend time clicking about, finding that information, going back to my other screen, making sure that it all works there. Whereas, like, making sure that, like, it's per se the process that you have and the tooling that you're using is a bit more developer first. And, like, again, you maybe change your experience like you make it easier for the developer to fix it. So yes, I actually agree with that summary and integrating with Azure pipelines or whatever sort of CI tool that you're using, because that will help developers 60-70% of the time. But that 30% where things don't go well, that is where per se frustrations start to per se kick in. So I think yes, I see where you're coming from, and I agree with what you're doing. But there's a lot more to go around that I believe in that can actually improve the experience.
I think maybe what Dotan is saying leads into that in a reasonable way is the additional responsibility often comes with mental overload for the devs. How do you suggest reducing that?
Like what? So like reducing like I think fantastic question, and transparently, like I don't think I have a fantastic answer to that question. I think like obviously making sure that developers are able to prioritize and making sure that developers are aware of what they need to work on is absolutely like going to help. But yes, I think like the whole mental burden of like a developer nowadays, especially with that work increase, is so high. And I think I will lean on someone else if anyone else has a great thought or has seen how to overcome that. But it's a very good point to ask. And I think the honest answer is I don't have a great response to that.
It's a tough one, right? Like it's something we're still figuring out. And I think it comes back to that whole logic of empowerment, right? Like some people will take that empowerment, they'll be, as the statement says, empowered by it, right? They'll feel confident about it. And other people may feel overwhelmed. And it is one of those hard juggles. I guess maybe one thing that kind of helps is you were mentioning things around tools that are built with a developer first focus. Are there any tools that or organizations that come to mind for you right now that are doing that are clearly focused on the developer first in this process?
Yeah, and I think nowadays, like I think nowadays there are loads of tools, and obviously like I will use the one that I think like I work for, like I think GitHub, and but there are loads of tools out there. Like I think GitHub has taken a very strong stance on creating experience and fostering experiences for developers where they don't have to per se leave their IDE or leave their source code management tool. Like we are very much trying to home in on that developer sweet spot. However, there are loads of tools out there. Like I think it's like, and I don't want to per se plug tools and then miss a few tools out. I know Cypress from a UI perspective. I know Contentful from a content management perspective. There are loads of tools that per se try and provide experiences that are really like focused on the developer. And I would absolutely like recommend, if you per se like if you're like attending a lot of these sessions later, that, and I know there's a few that are going to talk about the whole like developer first tooling, like you will see tools that are developer first throughout the schedule today.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, you've definitely given us a lot to think about. Any rounding thoughts? Looks like we've got a minute or two. I don't see any more questions, but just based on what you've kind of had in that bounce back on Q&A, like, is there any other rounding thoughts you want to add on to the end of this?
No, so I think I love per se like and just to point out a few things, like work smart, not not hard. Like I think that absolutely like attests to like making sure that experience is so streamlined. 'Cause I think like a lot of junior developers don't know how to work smart. Like
Yeah.
and that is one of the things that like I think a lot of people don't know what they don't know when they come into the development world, and we are expecting that, as we mentioned 3 or 4 times now, so much of developers. So I think like I treat it as my responsibility, but I think everyone in a developer role should treat it as their responsibility. So like to make sure like these processes and these experiences that we are creating are really aimed at the developer, so they can understand how to work smart and they can really understand how to per se pick up these tools. But again, just finished. I really hope you've sort of like found this useful, and you've at least taken one thing away from this presentation. So thank you ever so much, everyone. Like I really do appreciate the collaboration throughout.
Oh, thank you, Nick. You gave us plenty to think about. And I love that point you make, you know, the kind of alienation, maybe the expectations being high for new people coming in, right? We all learn our cheats, we all learn our shortcuts, and
Yeah.
sometimes we even try to hide them, right? So you want to make sure you're putting down 30 minutes when it took 15 or whatnot. And once people clock onto that, the expectation, the demand gets higher. And it's good to have these type of talks to help kind of unburden that a little bit, educate a bit. But thank you, Nick. It has been a pleasure. And thank you to all you watching. But still plenty to come. We're going to head to a very short break. And after that, on this track at least, we'll return next for simplifying orchestration and choreography in serverless applications. So go get yourself a drink, maybe get yourself a little snack, and we should be back in 5 to 10.
Thank you.